have touched on it, that mental part is actually, for me, I found the biggest part.
Yeah.
And by the time I went back, I even got a tutor. And that's the next question I'm going to ask you guys in terms of advising our all of us in terms of, when should you get a tutor? When should you not get a tutor? I realized I needed a tutor in order to remind me, because, I had so much, like I said, I have kids, I had so much on my hands. I was like, you know what, let me cut this thing in half. Let me get somebody to teach me the main concepts I need to know. It's not all of high school math I need to know. There's only some things I need to know. So I got a tutor, very few hours, maybe like 5-10 hours or 7 hours with the tutor, just to brush me up on my math, find out what my weak points were. Then I delved into those. Before, like Sam, I now went back into, okay, now what does the GRE, what's the technique of the GRE? So mine was broken out into like 2 or 3 phases. So I think I started studying like September, and I took my exam in January. So still, not quite 6 months, but I ended up only taking it one time. And then I did much better than I thought I would, because I didn't feel prepared for the math, but I just needed to make my deadlines. And I ended up getting 156 in the math, which I felt like was the place I was going to get in trouble. But, that ended up being 60th percentile. And then in my verbal, I got 161. So I think it's understanding yourselves. So let's talk a little bit more. So we talked about resources. Let's talk a bit more about in terms of, mentally knowing yourself, and then like the tutor angle. Did you guys use external, in addition to the materials, did you have people help you out, like in terms of tutors? And what's your opinion on that? Temi, we can start with you.
I think we might drop off in a second, but I will try and be quick before the 40 minutes. But I didn't have a tutor just because of the time frame. But as I said, I had the friend who took the GMAT, and I think she also tried to take the GRE at one point, but she did find that tutors were probably where she found the most build on her knowledge, just because it was teaching of content and way of doing the exam. So I think tutors are great, but I just didn't have time for that, because I was I think once I did the exam, I wanted to focus on other things besides the short turnaround time.
Yeah, because you had to also take not just the exam, you had a whole other thing, many other.
You create a whole package about yourself. So I think I was only applying to one school, but for people who apply to multiple schools, you're writing multiple essays. And I think some people do like copy and paste for each school, but for the essays, but there's a lot of work that has to go into writing a good essay. There's a lot of work in trying to prep your referees. There's a lot of working on your resume, which I think a lot of people, because I even found I did a lot of my resume, but coming into school, I probably worked on my resume almost every week in terms of tweaking it, making it better. So there's a lot of work that goes into creating your entire package. So,
so you didn't want to spend any more time than you needed to.
That's why I said I just did the 3 weeks, because it was just like, this thing is just one data point that I need to just get done as quickly as possible.
That's another good point.
It's one of 7, and I think now, so when I first applied to Yale, at least, they had about 6 items, and then halfway through my round, they added an additional like a questionnaire, or like a behavioral sort of questionnaire thing to do. So these schools are constantly evolving to add new things to their application process to try and see you as a whole person, not beyond just your scores or like what your undergrad is or undergrad grades were. So definitely, I think if you have tutors, if you have people around you who know how to do it, who have tips and tricks, I think it's valid. The only thing I would say to that is be conscious, not wary, but conscious of people who have done the test, who have high scores, who think they can. Because I think I can give tips of how I've done it for myself, but I would never push myself as an expert in the GRE. I would never push myself as a tutor of the GRE. So, and I wouldn't equate high GRE scores to someone knowing how to teach you how to do it. So getting good, checking the reviews of the tutors who you go and meet, and just ensuring that they align with your way of learning.
Okay, thank you. Sam, what about you? What's your take on tutors?
I agree with a number of things that Temidayo said. I can also understand why she try to do it within 3 months because she wrote the exam very close to the application stage. I think my advice around there is don't wait till the dying minute. I took my GRE, my first GRE, I took my second one in November, and then I took I took my second one in November. The month before November was October. So I'd started my preparation around towards the end of August, September, around August. That's pretty late, right? But it was still enough for me to be able to join on the boat for second round. I applied for business school, and the reason why I want to explain this is I just want to explain how the timing for your GRE can impact the quality of application that you submit, can impact the round, and ultimately impacts the kind of funding you get. So when I first applied in 2018, I applied in the second round, and I got dinged by a number of schools that I know I would have gotten into because I applied in second round. I was writing my GRE up until November. By the time it came out, my applications were not as strong as they could be. As Temidayo mentioned, that she understood that the other part required time as well. So by the time I was applying again, I didn't have to bother about GRE. I focused on other aspects, and that turned out pretty good because I got fully funded for a number of programs. Back to the question about, again, I think I may have forgotten your question. What was the question?
Even I have forgotten the question.
It was about other
I think
people
it had to
helping.
do about tutors.
Tutors, thank
Okay,
you.
about tutors. Thank you very much for that. So with tutors, I think you have to understand yourself. I'm just as Temidayo said, I'm not going to make myself a standard. I did spend a lot of time trying to understand. And I'm a teacher by nature. So yeah, but I will not make myself a standard as well. With tutors, you need to understand yourself. I didn't use any tutor because I felt I knew how to learn. I knew how to learn myself. I self-trained myself for a number of things. So it wasn't an issue bringing that experience into GRE. But if you need to get a tutor, by all means get one. If you need to go back to the basics and really understand some of the math things and you think a tutor would help, find one and get one. But just be wary of tutors who just want you to do practice on your own and are not willing to explain every other seemingly unrelated issues, but they influence your life. For instance, for somebody, it could be the way you scheduled your time. You may not be as lucky as Temidayo, who could discuss with the boss who understood. I didn't have bosses who wrote GRE. I worked in a civil who applied to business school. I worked in a civil engineering firm where everyone either was considering a master's or a PhD, and 90% of them considered a master's in the UK. So nobody really understood what I was trying to do. So I couldn't get that time off. I was only lucky to be writing GRE around the time when I took my leave, and I just extended it by the virtue of some other things that came up. So it gave me more time to focus on that, even though I still had to work from home. So with tutors, if you think it would help, get one. But if you don't, or you can't afford one, it's not the end of the world. You can still pass GRE without it.
Totally. We have a question here about paper. Just so we don't make the assumption. You guys took the computer-based test, correct?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Do you know anybody in your network that took the paper test?
For me, if I'll go, because I took the test, I believe I took the test in Nigeria. No one is taking the paper test anymore, except if you're in the village or you're somewhere unreached by the internet. No one's taking the paper test.
Okay, all right, because we had a question on that, so just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so let's jump more into, so we have just a little under 15 minutes before of the call. Please drop your questions for our panelists, for myself. Anything that you want more clarification on, let's discuss it. We just have less than 15 minutes to go on the calls. Temi touched on something, because the GRE is adaptive in sections and not in each question. So, she touched on one of the reasons that she felt it benefited her to take the GRE over the GMAT. Correct, Temi?
Yeah, so what I learned when I was researching is that with the GRE, you do the writing section first, and then you have 4 sections, 2 math, 2 quants, 2 verbals. And they only actually mark one of those sections, but it's random. And at the same time, based on how you do perform in the first section is determines if the second section is harder or easier. So there's a bit of Russian roulette and trying to game the system. But if you're able to sort of, and what I've also found is with the writing, I don't know, different programs are different, but Yale does not really care.
Hello?
Hello?
I'm not sure if everybody else is hearing you correct. Is Temi clear to everybody? It was becoming a bit muffled on my end.
No, I think
Hello?
we lost at some point.
Not really.
Oh, okay, yes, we can hear you now. I think we can hear you.
Okay, I said
you were talking about the writing section?
Yes, so it's different for different. I don't know about all courses, and as I said, I also did this 2-3 years ago, but different schools have different ways they handle the writing section. Yale doesn't really care about it, or did not really care about the writing section. So I obviously did my best to show that I wasn't an illiterate, but I didn't really give as much. I didn't really spend as much time on that as possible because I knew it wasn't going to count. So I made sure that I didn't tire myself out in the writing section, and I just tried to perform very well in those first 2 sections of the quantum verbal, so that whatever I got in the next adapted bit of the test would be a good test.
But this is a good segue. If you don't mind me cutting in terms of, let's focus now on the day of the test, right? You've done all this preparation, you're ready, you've booked your dates. Let's talk about what's happening, right? In those 3.5, or is it 4 hours? I can't even remember. How do you manage how do you manage your mental mindset? Hello? Sam, what did you say?
Hello.
I said 4 hours, 4+.
4 hours, okay, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Timmy.
So I think, first of all, what I did was the day before I didn't do anything. I took it easy. At that point, you're not learning anything new. And obviously everyone's different, but for me, I knew I wasn't learning anything new. And on the day of, I tried to, I'm not sure what it is like now in Lagos, but I know at least in the London Testing Center, you could have different times of the day. But I tried to do mine as early as possible. So you've woken up, you've had breakfast, you're fresh. The testing center, I think, was on Ilupeju Road. It's in Ilupeju or somewhere. It's a bit of a dumpster fire in that place. So I think going in there, just prepare that someone's going to shout, is a bit disruptive. It's just a lot going on. So trying to get rid of all of that stimulus and just focus on the test. When you start, and obviously with the exam, you always start with the writing. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 sections. I think it was two sections of writing. And there's also a method in how it's 2, right? Yeah, and there's also a method in how you write those sections. So I found the Princeton prep very helpful in just saying, okay, this is how you actually write in those sections. So it's very formulaic, and I just did that, and I didn't really spend too much time thinking about that because I knew mentally I was going to be focused on the quantum verbal sections. One thing that I would say that was very important is good paper management. And I think that is a skill to start building now, especially if you
mean the scrap paper?
Yeah, the scrap paper. Okay. I think that's a skill to very much try and build, especially if you intend to explore careers in management consulting or any strategy role. And I think most MBAs want to do some sort of strategy. And you will be doing casing or case interviews. So learning how to do paper management, being very structured in how you use your paper is something that, halfway through when you see the time is running out, you start going a bit wild with your paper, but good paper management is something I would say is a good skill to have. And just don't stress out. I think what I did, this is one of the tips that I actually found in the Princeton review, is if you're really struggling with a question in a section, the way the GRE is built, you can actually go back and forth and come back to questions. So sort of flag it, go and do another question that is a bit easier and go back. And I think having a watch there and I think that's why I say the legal center is a bit of a dumpster fire, that you can't have, you first of all keep bags in a certain place. I don't think you can have I can't remember if you can have water with you, but I remember there were things like you can't, whatever you have on. So I was wearing a sweater at one point because the room was quite cold. And they were like, once you have it on, you can't take it off. So just being aware of those it was very, as I said, it was very,
I know that center, and let me just cut you in. If you can choose your center, don't choose that center.
Exactly. But I think at that point, that was the only center that was available. They were just very because they take a picture of you and they're like, however you appear in that picture is how you must stay for the rest of the.
I took my first exam in that center. So
JKK or something, right?
Yes, JKK, yes. It's very rowdy inside, and if you're not mentally prepared for the noise, it could destabilize you.
Exactly.
This is some good expo.
Yeah.
But as I said, I think at that point, I think later on in the year, they opened the one in Ogba or something. But at that, there's one but there was only that JKK, and it was just a lot of stimuli. So you have to be very focused. But I think good paper management, time when it's going, that in each section you can move back and forth. So do the ones that you find easier and go back to the ones that are a bit, and then when even the ones you find a bit hard, then you start to employ the strategies of process of elimination, what sounds right. I think a lot of it is judgment calls. So
your intuition. So
sorry, just to add to what she said.
Okay, go ahead, Sam.
Go ahead. About the center, there's a center on the island, Lagos Island. I would recommend that if you could choose your center. It's around Victoria Island. It's very calm, quiet. There was no noise, and that's why I took it the second time. On the exam day, I just found myself floating through time. As soon as I started till the end, I'm not sure I had enough time to think. I was on auto mode. That's why if you're not so used to taking the test, you need to be able to get all your ability to answer question into your own habit. You need to make it your habit. It takes time. So there are questions I realized I could solve after I stepped out. But because I was just going through the motion and I had to revert back to my habits. So if you've not practiced enough to make it your second nature, you will struggle during the exam.
Yeah, muscle memory is very, 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 very big when it comes
very
to
important.
tests.
Very important.
Very important. I took a practice test every Friday, and I simulated the exam. So I would turn off my phone. I was in an office. I locked the door, and I would take the exam exactly like the way, because I found out that what I was dealing with was I didn't have the endurance. So that's something that you're going to battle. So you might know everything. If you're not used to sitting through a 4-hour exam without breaks, without more than a 10-minute break, you're used to checking your phone, you're used to doing all these things, it will slap you in the face on that day. Yeah. Which was what happened to me my first practice exam. So I did my first practice exam and it was horrible. I got thirsty. I started feeling faint. I started feeling sick. I was like, I can't imagine if this was really the real test. I would have flunked out. By the time I was taking my last practice exam the week before, the Friday before the next Saturday, like Samuel said, it was like muscle memory. I wasn't thinking. Like, I was so used to it. My body was used to it. I knew when the 10-minute break was coming up. I just drank water, took a light snack. Nothing that's going to upset my stomach. That's not when I want to be drinking Coke or anything like that. And I did the exact same thing on the day of the exam. And it just felt like one of my practice exams. And that really helped me, because that way I could focus on the stuff and not on my body or how I was feeling or how my back was hurting or how I was tired from sitting down or how the chair was hard. And same thing, the room was cold where I was, but luckily for us, they told us to check in our center, they told us to take off so if I came in with a sweater, they checked the sweater and everything, then you could wear it back. So when you're inside the room, if you want to take it off, you can take it off, because there were cameras and everything, and they had already checked the sweater. So that's a good point you guys raised about knowing the center, being comfortable, knowing the rules of the center.
In fact, I'd advise that 3 days before your exam, just go to the center. Speak to the people there and try to glean their experience with respect to how GRE is being written. Right? You can walk in. It's a very powerful mental exercise. walk in and sit down if you're allowed, and sit down in one of the chairs and just paint a picture of what that exam day you look like. Take that back to your practice session, and when you're practicing, imagine yourself being in that room. I think it really helps. It really helps.
It definitely does. There was one other thing that threw me off that day, though, which I couldn't have anticipated, and that was everybody's typing on the keyboard. I found it very distracting. Like,
oh my goodness!
In the beginning, the writing, that writing section, because we were all at the same time, came in at the same time. I was like, oh my gosh! Like, it literally took me like a minute to be like, zone it out and focus on what you have to do. But the clacking drove me nuts. I don't know why. It just did. I don't know if it was the kind of keyboards they had in that room. It was very loud, very distracting. There were headphones, but the headphones were not noise cancelling. So they were useless to me. So keep that in mind.
And I took my earbuds. The construction earbuds. They said I couldn't take it in.
Yeah.
They said I could. I had to press it. This is rubber. But they said, no, this can't be nothing. But still, they didn't trust. Said it wasn't some kind of technology. So they dropped it out.
One thing I would say is, like, because I think when you hear people typing at the start of the exam, it can sometimes make you think, goodness, what do they know? Why are they all being so quick? But I think if you take, especially with the writing, and depending on what programs you're trying to apply to, if you take time to just spend the first 2-3 minutes planning what you're going to write, it also gives you a bit of a way to calm down in that, because I think if tensions are a bit higher, a bit anxious, it gives you a way to calm down and plan a bit. And just because, as I say, the writing isn't as crucial most of the time, you can sort of, you're not burning out and just typing, and then halfway through the essay, you're like, what am I going to write? What am I going to write? And start freaking out before you even get to the main course.
Yeah, very good.
Yes. Because what I found is when people were typing, I was like, what are they typing? And then
it's like, they didn't even plan. They didn't plan. They were just jumping into type. I was like, wait a minute, aren't you guys going to plan what you're writing? I was like, what's your own? Face your own now. If they don't plan, why are you disturbing yourself?
Yeah. I think Temidayo has raised a very big point. And I can contribute to something with respect to the writing. I haven't spoken to a number of admission officers. You see, the analytical writing section is like your handbag. You know, it mustn't draw attention to itself. That's just it. If you're wearing a very nice red gown and you're holding a polythene bag to a dinner, then there's something wrong. There's something wrong. So your analytical writing, it doesn't have to be a 6.0, but it shouldn't be like a 1 or a 2. So just do enough to get a 4 and focus on your verbal and quantitative section that they pay enough attention on, which is actually your red fine gown to your dinner.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for raising that. That's a very good point. We're right at 1 hour. If you have to leave, that's fine. But Temi, do you have about 5 more minutes with us? Can you give us 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Sam, what about you?
Oh, no problem.
Okay, yeah, because we have two questions I want to jump into. And then if we still have time, fine. If not, then we'll sign out. So someone is asking, is it compulsory to practice all the topics, particularly for the quant, e.g. circles, triangles, because I find that not all the topics come out in the exam. Either one of you can take that.
I mean, it doesn't hurt. I think it's better to, as I say, if you're weaker in some areas, focus on that, if you have a short timeline. But I think being as well prepared as you can be, I think if there's some things that you think, I also think don't try and guess what the exam is going to ask you. Just practice as though you would practice for any other exam. Obviously, if you find that you're good, I can't remember what the different sections were called, but if you find that you're good at reading graphs and, you know, maybe do only 10% of that and focus on the areas that you're a bit weaker at. Obviously, there's no point going, if you have a Mensa score that a high Mensa score and you know how to do all the math, there's no point, but you don't know English or whatever, or you don't know verbal, there's no point doing only math and like ignoring verbal. So really, I think one thing that is a running thread through this entire conversation is understanding yourself and understanding how you study and how you work. So if that is, if the circles and triangles is something you don't want to do, don't do it. But if it comes up, you feel like you've missed an opportunity, especially if you don't know how to do it.
Yeah, just to add to what Temidayo said,
I think what is really important is I want to talk about the different sections, just answer that question. There's what you call the experimental section. You can never tell whether it's going to be quantitative or verbal for you. Now, if it is quantitative, chances are that it will cover all of the section. You can never place a bet on what part will come out. The trick here is focus on your weak areas. If you find that you're good in some areas, focus on improving my advice is you need to know everything, because the day you choose not to focus on geometry, you might have an exam, and it happened to me. I didn't focus on chart interpretation. And I got the first question, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. I knew at that point in time that, Sam, you messed up, because I didn't practice well for chart interpretation. In fact, at the point, yes, for data interpretation, yes. But in fact, at the point when I was going to submit my test score, because once you finish the exam, you can decide whether to send it to the schools that you've already pre-chosen before going into the exam, or you can cancel your score. So if you cancel your score, you will never know what you scored. I was strongly tempted to cancel my score, only for me to click send, and I realized that I scored 160 in my verbal and 150 something in my quant. But the point here is you can't place a bet anywhere else. Just focus on improving the weak areas. And that's why it's important to start early and know yourself.
All right, thank you, guys. We have another question. What is the average score to secure full or very good funding for top B schools?
That's an interesting question. Okay, I'll quickly go first because I apply to a lot of schools. A number that I'm not really ready to release, but it's a lot. I mean, it could form a football team out of the number of schools I applied to.
We have 1 more minute on our call.
Okay, so to answer that question, I think you want to go for as high as possible. I tell people the minimum you should try and go for is 320. I had a 321. So the minimum is 320. A 321 might not get you full funding for a top 10 MBA program. But it will get you partial funding for any top 10 MBA program. Maybe a 333 or a 335 or a 340 over 340 will get you full funding in those schools. Again, it's a total package, but they use the GRE score to quickly screen you because they have profiles to craft, and they are ranked based on that profile as well. So your GRE is a big part of your application.
Yeah. So go ahead.
What I would say to that is, because I work as an admissions ambassador at Yale, is, and I think I've sort of alluded to it in my manner and my tone, is that GRE is only one, or whatever your assessment scores is only one of a huge picture, one bit of a huge picture. First of all, yes, higher scores, there's a correlation between higher scores and scholarship. But there are situations where people have lower scores. So for example, I have a friend who applied to Yale with a 315 and she was waitlisted in round 1. In round 2, she applied to Stanford with the same score and got the Africa scholarship. So I think there's no correlation I think it's about building your profile and making sure you're showing your richest self. So I think, yes, there's a correlation between that, but there's so many different other factors, and the school is trying to build an interesting class. They don't want just a room full of investment bankers or a room full of people who have 340s. I think it's about, what have you done? What are your extracurricular activities? What are your ambitions? And it's about really showing that, which is also why I say spending a lot of time on the other aspects of your application, in that if you get spending, so for example, in your essays or your reference letters, not just writing what you think the school wants to hear, but writing about yourself and being honest about yourself, because you never really know what surprising category you might fall into. I think in terms of the programs, obviously depending on the rankings of the different schools have different fundings, and you might some schools you're a better candidate for the other. So in the case of my friend, for example, she wasn't a great candidate for Yale, but she was an amazing candidate for Stanford. And Stanford is ranked higher than Yale. So, and one other thing I would say about the GRE is that for Yale, GRE doesn't really count towards their ranking. So that was probably another reason why I did the GRE. So just think about who does what, and don't ask the questions as explicitly because it's a bit crude. But when you're talking to students, so just if you're doing your research and you're trying to explore your school, speaking to current students and being like, what kind of roles do you think ranking plays in your school as opposed to admission or as opposed to student life or whatever, like asking very thoughtful questions. I think getting into programs as well, there's a lot of gaming it of. So as an admission advisor, for example, when I've had conversations, if I've had a very good conversation with someone, I can then send a note to the admissions to be like, I had this amazing conversation with this person's going to be great for the school, blah, blah, blah. And the person might not fit the profile, but the school, at the end of the day, school wants people that fit. They're going to be a fit. They don't really care, because most people say things like, oh, I want to save the world, come to school and become consultants. So they know that not everyone's going to do the exact thing that they say in their essays. But it's about being honest about yourself and being your interesting full self and being sure that you are fit for the school. So one tip I would say is, GRE is important, do your best in it, but really try and be as full and explore as much as possible. Try and explore and speak to current students, try and understand, speak to alumni, try and understand what the culture is like. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to end up in a school where you will not fit, or you will feel left out or marginalized, or you're just not a cultural fit because you feel miserable. And the final thing I would say is also be wary of things like, I know NCI, for example, you can only do the GMAT. So be sure about what your school's policy is around GRE and GMAT. If you want to do dual degrees, so Yale is huge on dual degrees, you need a GRE as opposed to GMAT. So think about those things when you're making your choices.
I think that's a good note for us to wrap up. Thank you so much, Temi and Sam. Can you, if you don't mind, leaving your contact details in the chat box, your emails or your LinkedIn profile, so that our attendees can reach out to you with subsequent questions?
Just before we sign out, I just wanted to bring attention to something with respect to COVID and the impact it's having on exams. Right now, many centers are closed because of social distancing rules. So GRE and GMAT are moving to take the test online. But the GRE has an edge over the GMAT just for one simple reason. GRE is only section adaptive. So it only changes based on the outcome of a section. Whereas in the GMAT, it is question adaptive. At the end of the day. And the other thing is, with the GRE, you can go back and change the answer to your question within a section because it's section adaptive. But whereas in the GMAT, you can't. Once you've answered the question, that's the end. So in the area of having to answer the question or take home exams where you no longer have access to writing papers, where you have to use a proctor and things like that, it's usually very difficult for you to say, you know what, I can answer this question right now, I'll come back to it. But that you don't have that luxury with GMAT. So that's another edge GRE has over GMAT when it comes to writing GRE in an unprecedented time like this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know Temi touched on that earlier too, but thanks for reiterating that, Sam. This call is recorded, right, Sam?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because I see one question here that was answered earlier on in the earlier time of the call. So please make sure you're subscribed to our mailing list so that when we mail out the recording, you can have your answered question. I think it was Steve that asked this question. Temi and Sam touched on it at the beginning of the call. Thank you so much for joining us today. Keep safe, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, Temi. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.